Hello, I'm David Roy, a doctoral student of the Department of Computer Science at Marquette University, Wisconsin, United States. And Dr. Thomas Watts is my advisor. This presentation is on performance of linear hashing and spiral hashing. Hashing is a key technology for key value stores. Key value stores are a mainstay of data organization in big data, for example, Amazon DynamoDB. We compare two schemes, linear hashing and spiral storage. We prefer to call it spiral hashing. They were developed in an era of slow CPU, small memory, and slow and small storage. And we compare with the modern system of today. Linear hashing stores key value stores in buckets. Uses part of the hash of the key to allocate the key value pair to the bucket. LH buckets are stored in a single page or a block of pages in storage, for example, hard disks. LH is very simple. It grows by splitting buckets in a predefined order. At the same time, LH has a very poor cyclic worst case performance for inserts and lookups. Spiral hashing also stores key value stores in buckets. It avoids cyclic behavior at the cost of a more involved addressing mechanism. Larson in 1988 compared both linear hashing and spiral hashing and concluded that linear hashing outperforms spiral hashing. But the context has changed today. Hashing data is stored in memory. Processor speeds have increased. Memory access times have changed. We evaluate both of them on a modern system. Our study shows that Larson's study is not valid in today's context. Dynamic hashing schemes implement key value stores. They provide key-based operations such as insert, update, delete, and read. Number of buckets increases as the hash file grows. Records consist of keys and values. Hashing places the records in a bucket calculated from the key. Dynamic hashing schemes adjust to the number of records so that the timing of the key-based operations are independent of the number of records. Linear hashing is a dynamic hashing scheme. It has a very stable performance, good space utilization, and files expand and shrink dynamically. Records are stored in buckets, and overflow records are stored in overflow buckets. Linear hashing is widely used in Berkeley DB, PostgreSQL. The number of buckets increases linearly with the number of records inserted. The load factor, alpha, is the number of records, n, over the number of buckets. The number of buckets is calculated by the floor of alpha and n. The number of buckets increases through splits, but the bucket that is split is independent of the size of the bucket. LH maintains a file state which consists only of the current number B of buckets, from which L load factor and S split pointers are calculated. For instance, B is equal to 2 to the power L plus S. If the number of buckets is incremented, bucket S is split into buckets S and bucket S plus 2 to the power N. In linear hashing, The bucket which is split on overflowing is not the one which is overflowing, but according to a scheme. During the split, the records in the buckets are rehashed and they either remain in the same bucket or move to the new bucket. The drawback of linear hashing is the existence of non-split and already split buckets. The non-split buckets tend to have twice as many records as split buckets. Spiral hashing was invented by Martin. Spiral hashing intentionally redistributes the records. When the file grows, the records of bucket S is distributed into two new buckets, for instance, 2S and 2S plus 1. And later on, bucket S is deleted. Larson, in 1988, concluded linear hashing always outperforms spiral hashing. We repeat the experimental evaluation and comparison of both. Fringe analysis. Fringe analysis analyzes the behavior of a data structure under mass insertion. Linear hashing is simple both conceptually and architectonically. During an epoch of inserts at a level, buckets fall into two different categories: buckets before split and after split. The former has twice the number of records. Growing data movement and the number of additional keys hashed with a single insert triggering a split follows a seesaw curve as in the figure in linear hashing. The same is the case on both batch inserts too. Spiral hashing avoids this fringe behavior. The probability of a record belonging to a bucket is log base 1 plus 1 over I. The size of the split bucket is close to 1.44 over alpha. Our implementation details. Implementation of both linear hashing and spiral hashing in line with Larson and Ellis Slaughter's recommendations as an in-memory structure. Records are arranged in two-stage dynamic arrays of linked lists. Pointers to contiguous sets of buckets are collected in a segment array. A master array collects pointers to segments. This implements a dynamic array with little overhead. Segments are created when needed and deleted when unused in the case of spiral hashing. We used vector data structure from C++17 standard library. Buckets are singly linked lists in which we insert at the head. Each bucket and segment has a lock. There is also a global lock for the file state. Deadlock is avoided since locks are acquired in order from file state to bucket lock. We used exclusive locks for inserts and inclusive locks for lookups and update operations. We created linear hashing and spiral hashing data structures with bucket capacities of 3, 5, and 10 records. We tested behaviors of insertions and lookups independently. We generated 1 million records and inserted them, dividing the work among varying number of threads. Our measurements were obtained from a MacBook Pro with 2.4 GHz 8-core Intel i9 processor with 16 GB RAM. We give both the minimum and the average time of 20 independent runs. Our results are: larger the load factor, the slower the inserts, and faster the lookups. For inserts, spreading the works among more threads lowers the performance, probably due to the contention of file state and bucket segments as frequent splits occur. The figures show both for linear hashing and spiral hashing with no preload and with preload. Preloading almost has no effect. Lookups benefit from more threads, but only moderately. Spiral hashing outperforms linear hashing for lookups, but loses slightly for inserts. Maybe since spiral hashing needs to rebuild after splits, creating two new buckets and deleting the old one is the cause. Existence of large buckets in linear hashing seems to explain the slightly longer timing. We conclude linear hashing and spiral hashing were invented some 40 years ago, and linear hashing is used extensively in key value stores. Larson showed superior performance of linear hashing, and work on spiral hashing kind of dried up. We repeated the comparison and found that spiral hashing could be slightly advantageous. Our implementation used locks. Our future works are spiral hashing might be simpler because the old bucket after a split is no longer used, but can remain accessible for some time. A distributed version of spiral hashing can select the two best servers for the new buckets instead of being forced to live with the placement of the old buckets as in linear hashing. Lock-free multi-threaded implementation of linear hashing exists, but is still lacking for spiral hashing. Thank you.